Aquarius. If this found you tonight, it's not random. There is someone who once looked at you and saw their dream standing right in front of them. Not because you tried, not because you asked to be chosen, but because you were simply being you, and yet they stepped back. They went quiet. Not because they didn't care, but because your light forced them to face everything they were still running from. If this resonates, type in the comments "I receive what's meant for me." Because what comes next is not just about them, it's about the moment. Aquarius realizes their worth was never the problem. And this is where the real story begins. Aquarius, stay with me for a moment. Just you and me here. There are moments in life that don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with noise or signs flashing in the sky. They arrive quietly, almost gently. The way a familiar song finds you when you didn't know you needed it. That's how this moment feels. Because you didn't click on this by accident. Something in you paused. Something recognized itself. And that matters. You see, some connections are never meant to be loud. They don't come to impress the world. They come to touch one person exactly where they are. And if you're here, listening right now, it tells me something about you. It tells me you have a way of stepping into someone's life without forcing your way in. You don't push. You don't demand space. You simply arrive as yourself. And somehow, that was enough to change everything. There was a moment, maybe you didn't even notice it, when someone looked at you and felt seen in a way they never had before. Not excited. Not entertained. Seen. That kind of presence leaves a mark. Not the kind that fades with time. The kind that settles quietly in the chest and stays there. You may have walked away from that moment thinking it was small, thinking it was ordinary. But for them, it wasn't. Because some people don't remember every conversation. They remember how you made them feel when they were standing in their own uncertainty. And you, Aquarius, have a way of standing steady even when the ground isn't. You carry a calm that doesn't ask to be noticed. A strength that doesn't need to be proven. And that kind of energy can feel overwhelming to someone who's still learning how to hold themselves together. So if there's a part of you that has ever wondered why someone drifted away, why the silence came without explanation, why a connection seemed to pause mid-breath, I want you to hear this clearly. It wasn't because you weren't enough. Sometimes, the very thing that makes you feel like home to the right people can feel like a mirror to the wrong ones. And mirrors are uncomfortable when you're not ready to look. You didn't imagine the depth. You didn't overfeel. You didn't read too much into it. What you sensed was real. It just lived in a space they didn't yet know how to enter. Take a breath here. Let that land. Because this isn't about questioning your worth. It's about understanding your impact. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that lingers. And as we keep moving forward, as the night settles a little deeper, there's something else about this connection that deserves to be spoken out loud. Not to reopen old wounds, but to bring clarity where silence once lived. Stay with me. There's more here that was never meant to be lost. Aquarius, let me say this softly, because some truths land better that way. To them, you were never just someone they met. You weren't a phase. You weren't a passing interest. You were an idea that stayed. They didn't admire you loudly. They didn't always know how to show it. But in the quiet spaces of their mind, you became a reference point, a picture of what life could feel like if things finally made sense. When they looked at you, they saw strength, not the kind that needs armor, but the kind that comes from knowing who you are. They noticed how you stand on your own feet, how you don't lean on the room for approval, how your independence feels natural, not defensive. That kind of presence is rare. They sensed your emotional intelligence, even if they didn't have the words for it. The way you listen without trying to fix. The way you speak without needing to dominate. The way you hold space and somehow make it feel safer. And there was something else too. Something harder to name. An energy that felt unfamiliar to them. Calm yet expansive. Grounded yet cosmic. You didn't just exist in their world. You shifted it. There were moments when they caught themselves thinking, this is the kind of person I always imagined. The kind you don't outgrow. The kind you grow into. Not because you're flawless, you never claimed to be, but because you move through life in alignment with your truth. You don't betray yourself to be accepted. You don't dim what feels honest. And that, Aquarius, is what made you feel like a dream. But dreams can be intimidating when someone doesn't believe they deserve good things, when they're still negotiating with their own doubts, when they're used to surviving, not receiving. So instead of reaching for you, they held you at a distance in their mind, admiring quietly, longing silently, convincing themselves that someone like you belongs to a different version of life. If you've ever wondered why they hesitated, why they watched instead of stepped forward, why their admiration never fully turned into action, this is where the answer lies. You represented a possibility they weren't sure they could sustain. A future that required them to rise beyond old limitations, to meet you where you already were. Take a breath here, because this isn't about placing yourself on a pedestal. It's about recognizing how deeply you impacted someone just by being real. And maybe there's a quiet part of you that already knew this. That sensed the way their eyes lingered, the way their energy shifted around you, the way something unsaid hung in the air. You didn't imagine it. What they felt was genuine. They just didn't yet know how to carry something that meaningful without dropping it. And as we stay here together, as the night holds us steady, there's something important about this realization. Something that begins to reframe the silence, not as rejection, but as a story still finding its courage. Stay close. There's more truth waiting to surface. Aquarius, there is something about your presence that doesn't ask for attention. It doesn't need to announce itself. It simply exists. And that is exactly why it is so powerful. You don't walk into a room trying to be impressive. You don't shape yourself to fit expectations. You move through life with a quiet honesty, a clarity that feels natural to you. You speak when it matters. You stay silent when truth needs space. And you live by values that don't bend easily. To you, this feels normal, almost unremarkable. But to someone who has spent most of their life performing, adjusting, or hiding parts of themselves, your way of being feels unsettling. Not because it is wrong, but because it is real. When they were around you, something unfamiliar happened. They began to notice what they had been avoiding. Not because you pointed it out, not because you judged, but because your presence didn't flinch. You were honest without being harsh, clear without being cold, grounded without being rigid. And that contrast made their inner world louder. They started to see the places in themselves that were still waiting for approval. The habits formed from fear, the compromises they made long ago just to belong, just to be chosen, just to survive. And standing next to you, they couldn't escape the question they had been postponing for years. Who am I when I stop pretending? That is not an easy question. Not when someone is still learning how to sit with themselves. Not when self-love feels unfamiliar. Not when the idea of being seen feels heavier than being alone. So your light, Aquarius, did something tended. It reflected back the parts of them they hadn't yet healed. Not because you exposed them, but because you didn't hide. You became a mirror they weren't ready to look into for too long. And mirrors don't shout. They don't chase. They simply wait. You may have felt the shift, the subtle change in their energy. The way they pulled back right when things felt honest. The hesitation that arrived after moments of closeness. And maybe, just for a second, you wondered if you had done something wrong. Let me be clear here. You didn't. You were being yourself. And sometimes, that is the bravest thing in the room. Your light was never meant to be softened. It was never meant to be dimmed to make others comfortable. It exists to show what is possible. To remind people of who they could be if they stopped abandoning themselves. That kind of reminder can feel like hope to one person and pressure to another. And the truth is, you cannot control which one it becomes. What you can do is stay true to the way you move through the world, the way you choose clarity over confusion, depth over performance, integrity over approval. If they stepped away, it was not because your light was too much. It was because they were still learning how to stand in their own. And as you sit here now listening, breathing, letting this settle, there is something quietly rearranging itself. Because once you understand this, the silence stops feeling personal, the distance starts making sense, and a deeper compassion begins to replace self-doubt. Stay right here with me. There is a tenderness beneath this understanding, one that changes how everything before it is remembered. Aquarius, let's talk about the silence. Not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that's heavy with meaning. Because when they pulled back, it wasn't because their feelings disappeared. It was because those feelings became too loud inside a mind that already doubted itself. You may remember the shift, the way warmth turned cautious, the way presence became distance. No argument, no clear ending, just a quiet step backward that left you holding questions. Here's what lived beneath that moment. They didn't stop caring. They started questioning themselves. Being close to you made something undeniable rise up. A voice that said, "You're not ready. You're not enough. You'll disappoint them." And instead of letting that voice be challenged, they listened to it. They looked at you and thought, someone like this deserves stability, clarity, confidence. And all they could see were the places in themselves that still felt unfinished. Around you, their flaws felt louder. Their fears felt exposed. Their uncertainty had nowhere to hide. So they told themselves stories. Quiet ones. Convincing ones. I don't belong in their world. I'll only let them down. They'll see who I really am and leave anyway. And when someone believes that deeply, distance feels safer than hope. So they stepped back, not because they didn't want you, but because wanting you meant risking their sense of control, meant standing in vulnerability without armor. You see, love can feel threatening when someone has learned to survive by staying small. When they've been taught, directly or indirectly, that reaching too far leads to loss. And you, Aquarius, felt expansive to them, not demanding, not overwhelming. Just real. But real requires courage. If you're honest with yourself, you might have felt this before. That subtle sense that they were holding back. That their silence wasn't cold, just guarded. That their absence carried emotion, not indifference. And maybe, in the quiet moments, you wondered if you could have done something differently. Said less. Shined less. Been easier to approach. I want you to hear this clearly. Their retreat was not a reflection of your value. It was a reflection of the distance between who they were and who they believed they needed to be to stand beside you. Sometimes people walk away not because love is missing, but because self-trust is, and that creates a particular kind of grief. The kind that doesn't come from rejection, but from timing, from readiness, from inner battles you were never meant to fight for them. So if you're holding a quiet ache, if part of you still wonders why it ended in silence, allow yourself a softer explanation. They didn't choose distance over you. They chose distance over the fear of not being enough. And as you sit with that truth, as the night settles into your chest, something begins to loosen. The blame, the confusion, the need to replay every moment. Because when you understand this, the story shifts, the silence starts to speak. And what once felt like loss begins to feel like clarity arriving in its own time. Stay here. There's more unfolding in this space. Aquarius, there's a quieter truth beneath everything we've touched so far. One that explains more than words ever could. This person did not learn love in a gentle way. Not the kind that says you matter just for being here. Not the kind that teaches safety before expectation. They grew up learning how to adjust, how to read the room, how to disappear when things felt uncertain. Affection, when it came, often had conditions. Attention had to be earned. Silence felt familiar, so they became good at surviving, good at staying alert, good at needing very little, or at least pretending to. No one sat with them long enough to ask what they felt. No one mirrored their emotions back with care. And somewhere along the way, they learned a dangerous lesson, that their needs were inconvenient, that their presence was optional, that love was something other people received, not something they could rest inside. And when someone grows up like that, their heart learns to protect itself before it learns how to open. So when you came into their life, steady and self-aware, emotionally present without asking for anything in return, something inside them stirred. Not excitement at first, recognition. You represented what they were never taught to expect. And instead of thinking, I am lucky, their mind went somewhere else entirely. They thought, why would someone like this choose me? What am I missing? When will they realize I am not enough? Aquarius, old wounds don't always look like pain. Sometimes they look like doubt. Sometimes they look like distance. Sometimes they sound like a voice that says, don't get too close, you will only lose this anyway. So they did what they knew. They pulled back before they could be left. They minimized what they felt. They told themselves stories that made retreat feel logical. Better to walk away from the dream than to watch it slip through their fingers. And this is the part that matters most. They didn't push you away because you were wrong. They pushed you away because you were right. Because loving you required a version of themselves they hadn't yet learned how to become. That realization can hurt. Especially when you are someone who would have been patient. Someone who would have met them where they were. Someone who understands that healing takes time. But Aquarius, you were never meant to be the lesson they avoided learning. You were the invitation. And invitations don't force. They wait. They remain open. They respect timing. If there is sadness here, let it be gentle. Because this story is not about failure. It is about awareness arriving slowly. About a heart learning, perhaps for the first time, that love does not always come with a cost. As you sit with this, notice what begins to shift in you. How compassion replaces confusion. How understanding softens the edges of the past. How you no longer feel the need to question your worth. Because something important is happening now. The meaning of that connection is changing, not disappearing. Just settling into a shape that makes more sense. And in this quiet understanding, there is room for something new to breathe. Aquarius, there comes a moment when distance stops feeling safe. Not because the fear disappears, but because something else grows louder. It happens quietly, almost without warning. They see you moving through life without waiting for permission. Laughing again. Building something meaningful. Choosing peace where chaos once lived. And it lands differently this time. Because you are not standing still. You are not frozen in the moment they left. You are evolving. Expanding. Living in a way that does not revolve around their hesitation. That is when the realization begins to settle in. They notice how your light did not dim in their absence. How your world kept turning. How your joy did not depend on being chosen by them. And for the first time, The silence they once hid behind starts to feel like a risk. There is a particular ache that comes when someone realizes too late that what felt intimidating was also irreplaceable. They begin to imagine you being seen by someone who does not flinch. Someone steady. Someone who meets your clarity with confidence. Someone who does not question whether they are allowed to want you. And that image stirs something deep. The fear shifts shape. It is no longer just about not being enough. It becomes the fear of losing something they never fully allowed themselves to touch. They think back to the moments they held themselves back, the words they swallowed, the steps they did not take, and suddenly self-doubt is no longer the loudest voice. Loss is. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The one that whispers, what if that was the moment and I let it pass? Aquarius, this is where perspective changes. They begin to see you not as an impossible dream, but as a living presence moving further into alignment with your life. A presence that will not wait forever. And something in them understands that staying still comes with a cost too. This is not about regret in the way people often imagine it. It is about awareness. About finally recognizing the value of something not because it is gone, but because it is still glowing. They realize that love is not just about feeling. It is about showing up, standing firm, choosing courage over comfort. And for someone who has lived inside fear for so long, that realization can be disarming. You may sense this shift without words, a change in their energy, a pull that feels different than before, less guarded, more present. But here is the part I want you to hold gently. This moment is not about validation. It is not proof that you were right all along. It is simply a reflection of what happens when someone finally sees what was always there. You did not create this awakening by waiting. You created it by living, by continuing forward, by honoring your own rhythm, by choosing growth even when answers were unclear. And whether they step closer or not, something essential has already been reclaimed: your power. Because you understand now that your worth was never conditional. It never depended on their readiness. It never required their realization to exist. As the night continues to hold this space, there is a subtle calm beginning to form. Not anticipation, not expectation, just clarity. And in that clarity, the story begins to move in a way that feels honest, unforced, true to who you have become. Aquarius, there is a quiet shift that happens when running no longer feels like relief. It does not arrive with certainty. It arrives with honesty, the kind that sits heavy in the chest and refuses to be ignored. They begin to understand that distance has limits. That love cannot survive on thoughts alone. That silence, no matter how protective it once felt, eventually turns into a wall they are standing behind alone. And in that stillness, something real surfaces. They realize they have been living half inside the moment and half outside of it, feeling deeply, showing very little, hoping you would somehow understand without them ever having to say the words. But hope without courage starts to feel hollow. So the question changes, not do I care, but why am I hiding? They look at themselves more clearly now, not with shame, but with a kind of tired clarity, the kind that says, I cannot keep pretending this is enough. They begin to feel the weight of everything left unsaid, the moments they pulled away, the times they chose silence when presence was needed. And for the first time, they are willing to admit something simple, something honest. That fear was driving. That insecurity was louder than intention. That the pain they caused was never accidental. This is not about excuses. It is about ownership. They want to speak not to rewrite the past, but to stop carrying it quietly. They want to say, this scared me. I didn't know how to show up. I didn't trust myself enough to be seen by you. Because hiding behind strength no longer feels strong. They begin to understand that loving from a distance is still a form of avoidance. That staying quiet does not protect hearts. It only postpones truth. And truth, when it finally asks to be heard, does not come gently. You may feel this before it is spoken. A change in the way they look at you. A steadiness that was not there before. A sense that something inside them has settled enough to be shared. Not perfectly. Not eloquently. But sincerely. This is the moment when someone chooses to stop disappearing from their own life. And Aquarius, there is something important for you here too. You are not responsible for making this easier. You are not required to soften your boundaries to receive honesty. You simply listen from the place you now stand, grounded, aware, whole. Because whatever comes next is not about proving love. It is about meeting truth without masks, and as this space opens, something subtle begins to form. Not urgency, not pressure, just a sense that clarity is no longer afraid of daylight. Let yourself notice how this feels. The calm, the steadiness, the absence of needing to rush toward any outcome. There is strength in allowing things to arrive as they are, without force, without fear. And as the night continues to hold us, as words find their way into air, there is a softness here that makes honesty possible. Not because everything is resolved, but because something essential is finally being honored. Aquarius, this part is just for you. Not the version of you that stays strong for everyone else, but the one who listens late at night, when the world finally goes quiet. You were never meant to be loved halfway. Never meant to be held at a distance while someone figured themselves out. Your heart was not designed for silence. It was designed for resonance, for clarity, for truth that meets you eye to eye. And somewhere along the way, you may have learned how to wait, how to be patient, how to understand people's wounds before they even spoke them. That empathy is a beautiful gift, but it is not meant to cost you yourself. You do not need to shrink your light so someone else feels less exposed. You do not need to soften your truth to make it easier for someone to stay comfortable. You do not need to carry the weight of another person's healing on your shoulders. You are allowed to be met, fully, openly, without apology. If someone steps toward you with awareness, with accountability, with a willingness to stand in their own life, you get to pause. You get to feel. You get to choose. And if they remain governed by fear, by avoidance, by the old stories that keep them small, you are not required to wait for them to catch up. You are not leaving them behind or walking with yourself. There is a difference. You were a dream to someone because you represent what is possible. Integrity. Depth. Emotional presence. A life lived in alignment. But dreams are not meant to trap you. They are meant to inspire movement. And if someone chooses to stay asleep, that does not mean the dream was wrong. It simply means you were never meant to stay there. Aquarius, your value does not increase when someone finally recognizes it. It was always there. Quiet. Steady. Unshakable. You do not have to announce it. You do not have to prove it. You simply live it. And the right people feel that immediately. They do not hesitate. They do not disappear. They do not ask you to wait in uncertainty. They meet you where you stand. So as you sit here now, listening, breathing, letting this story settle into you, notice the calm that begins to take shape. Not excitement. Not anticipation. Just a grounded knowing that whatever unfolds from here will not require you to abandon yourself. That love, when it arrives in its truest form, will feel clear, safe, mutual. And if this chapter taught you anything, let it be this. You are not here to be chosen someday. You are here to be recognized now. Let the night hold that truth for you. Let it rest in your chest, because what you carry forward from here is not longing. It is alignment. Aquarius, before you go anywhere, let me leave you with this. The most surprising part of this story was never about them. Not their silence, not their fear. Not even the moment they finally understood what they lost. The real turning point was the moment you realized you never needed to be chosen to be complete. That quiet shift changes everything. Because once you see your own worth clearly, love stops feeling like something you chase. It becomes something that recognizes you when it's real. If this message landed in your chest tonight, if it felt like someone finally said what you've been carrying in silence, let yourself acknowledge that. Type in the comments, "I trust myself now." Not for anyone else, just for you. And if this space feels safe, if this voice feels familiar, stay connected. Subscribe. Be part of this circle of Aquarians who choose awareness over confusion, clarity over longing, and truth over waiting. Because this is not the end of the conversation. It's the moment you stop doubting your intuition. The moment you walk forward without needing permission. There are more messages coming, more clarity waiting, more reminders of who you are becoming. Until then, carry this with you. You were never too much. You were simply ahead of the moment, and the journey is still unfolding.